It was my freshman year in the University of Alabama. I had gotten my roommate's information a few weeks in advance, and his name was Brandon. This was back in 2013. We had been in contact in the weeks before classes would start. However, due to family-related reasons, Brandon had to switch to a different school right before classes even began. So for the first weekend, as everyone else was meeting their roommates, I was unpacking alone, still not yet assigned a replacement roommate. I did meet some of the other kids on my floor though. They were nice. Then, that Sunday night, my roommate arrived. He was walking through the dorm hall with a backpack looking confused, and I asked him if he had just been transferred into this building, and he said yes. I asked him if he was in dorm number 5. That wasn't the actual number of my room, I'm just using that for the story. But he said yes, that was his room. So I shook his hand, gave him my name, and told him I was his roommate. He told me his name was Robert, but to call him Bob. Unusual, I'd never met someone named Robert who preferred to be called Bob. I led Bob to the dorm, in which I had already decorated and furnished on my side. His side was still empty. He plopped his backpack on his bed and looked at me and smiled for a bit, then said in a slight Turkish accent that he didn't have all of his stuff yet. He opened his backpack and pulled out a sheet which he threw over his bed. Since it was already past 9 and tomorrow was the first day of class, Bob and I just sat on our respective beds chatting. I tried to read his vibe at first, as you do when meeting a new person, let alone your roommate. I couldn't really get a good read on him though. He seemed a little quieter. He had this very deep voice and maybe a slightly awkward vibe to him. But I was purposely not judging because people can be nervous when meeting other people for the first time. Anyway, eventually, after talking for a bit, Bob just laid flat on the bed with the sheet on it and used his backpack as a pillow. It looked incredibly uncomfortable. I had no idea how or why he was doing that. I offered him a pillow and he accepted it. I eventually fell asleep past 10. And do you ever wake up to something but you don't know what it was? That happened to me that night. I was confused why I woke up because I didn't hear anything. But that was the freaky thing. It was dead silent in there, not even the sound of Bob breathing. I flipped to my side and screamed at the tall figure looming over my bedside. I came to the realization that it was Bob after he started apologizing and said that he was just going to the bathroom. My heart was beating like it was running a marathon. I couldn't even think to ask him why he was standing over my bed like that if he was just going to the bathroom. He apologized again as he went back to his bed. I told him it's okay. Needless to say, I was wide awake after that. I slept on my side with my back to him the rest of the night though, trying to avoid the uncomfortableness. The next morning, I woke up to my alarm, and I saw Bob was still laying in his bed, likely pretending to be sleeping still. I went through my bag to get my books and such, and I had this feeling in my gut that something was moved in my bag, like it was gone through. I looked up at Bob again, and he was still allegedly sleeping. I decided to take a couple of my more valuable things and throw them in my backpack that I took to class. In class, I emailed the housing department and then submitted a room change request online, stating my roommate made me uncomfortable. After class that day, I returned to my dorm and was confused to notice the door was being held open with a door stopper. I noticed Bob had a big duffel bag on his bed now. I guessed he was unpacking. I laid in my bed on my laptop and eventually Bob came in. He greeted me and went to his bed, where he took his duffel bag and put it under the bed, and he literally just looked at me with this empty expression. I pretended to not really notice, but his weirdness was really bothering me. I finally looked back at him with not a friendly expression, and he gave me a slight nod. Then he climbed into his bed and just laid there on his phone. Eventually, I went out to the dining hall for dinner. When I came back, Bob was still there. I didn't know what his deal was, if he'd ever leave the dorm or what. I asked him if he had class that day. He said yes, but just one. That night, after turning the lights off, I noticed Bob leaning on the wall in his bed, facing me on his phone. I constantly felt like he was looking at me. I was anxious to get a response from the housing department, so I checked my email and saw they responded, but it wasn't the response I was hoping for. The lady who emailed me back expressed confusion in my request, stating my replacement roommate had not yet been assigned and that there should be no one else in the room with me. I looked at Bob, who looked back at me. I was about to ask him if he had his key to the room on him. I didn't ask that though. I put my laptop and other belongings in my backpack and duffel bag, as he just watched. He didn't say anything, and I think he knew that I knew. I left the room without saying anything, went to a safe place and called campus police to report him. By the time they arrived to the dorms, Bob, or whatever his real name was gone, along with his little bit of stuff. I found out that night that he stole some clothes from me, my iPhone charger, and some of the food I stored in my closet. As for what he was doing watching me sleep, I could only imagine he was making sure I was asleep before going through my stuff. I had a completely random, possibly homeless person in my room for basically an entire 24 hours. My real roommate moved in 2 days later,